Welcome, Ben Maynard. How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you, John. How are you?
Brilliant, thank you. Just like to introduce Ben to the viewers. I've known Ben now for a few years, and he's my mentor now, actually, in the LeSS community. And thank you, Ben, for all that mentoring you're giving me. I really appreciate that, and got trained by you a couple of weeks ago again as well, which is fantastic. Hitting the reset button, fantastic.
Always happy.
And you've been a less trainer, less coach for quite a few years now, and you've been doing a fair bit in the less world, but not just less. You've been doing other things in agility as well. So I was wondering if you could kind of maybe just give us your background in terms of how did you even get interested in agility in the first place?
Yeah, sure. And if I'm talking too much, just like give me a signal. So I got into agility, I suppose my first time I became aware of it when I was at university, and that was like 15 years ago. 15 years ago. So I was at uni in the early noughties, and we had a great lecturer there who was the professor, the custodian for the course we were doing, and he kind of introduced us to loads of books like Mythical Man Month, Death March, Ed Jordan, like classic software development texts, and didn't really mention anything about agile, although I think we learned a little bit about like DSDM or something like that. Anyway, it came to my dissertation, and I was really interested in this new thing called agile, particularly in test-driven development. And part of my university degree, we had to go and find a client. We had to collect requirements, do a design, and then go away, take all of that, and build a piece of software, and then give the client this piece of software, and then write 10,000 words on the research we did into the approach that we used to go through that process. So I kind of learned a lot about agile then, and learned a lot about test-driven development, and then did nothing with that for about 5 years, and just worked in banks in back office doing operational work.
Oh,
And it was kind of weird. But even like I remember, I didn't know much about lean or anything else at that point, but I always had an eye, I suppose, for like things that didn't seem right in operations, like the way they were tracking our progress or working in call centers, and just kind of looking at the way things were happening, thinking that you're not measuring the right things. They would always measure what was left. They would never measure how much we had done. And it was very demoralizing because you would always have like stuff on the board and say, why aren't you doing it? You're behind. It's like, well, actually, I'm working incredibly hard. You're just not looking at any of the stuff I've done. All you're doing is looking at what's left. And so that kind of thing really frustrated me all through my career. And then when I got the opportunity to dust off my degree and become a business analyst, I did that when I was at JP Morgan in Bournemouth and started writing requirements documents. Was given loads of advice about things you should do, like put lines in your requirements document, like including but not limited to was always a good one. So then it wasn't your fault if you missed something. um, I use that one a lot because that's part of the problem. As I was writing these requirements documents, knowing a bit about agile, but I was going through the whole process, and you know, I've always been a kind of anxious person. I've had my kind of problems with depression and stuff, and I found that being a business analyst made me incredibly anxious and often quite depressed because I never got any reward for for stuff I was creating, and the feedback loop was so long on what I was writing, it just didn't work for me. So when I kind of got the opportunity to, get into proper software development, that was fun. Do some database design, database implementation. And work more closely in a cross-functional team who are apparently agile, I kind of got a taste for it. So when I was lucky enough to be given the opportunity to run my own delivery, to decommission the platform that I had just built with some colleagues, they said, how would you run the delivery? If you were going to kind of decommission system A and we're going to bring in a vendor platform, like how would you run it? And I said, well, I'd use Scrum. I'd just been on a Scrum Master course with Pete Measy, Ratak, many years ago. And I thought, no, this is it. This just makes perfect sense to me. And so I was given the opportunity to kind of start this delivery, and we started using Scrum. And I think I got the gig because I notionally seemed to know more about Scrum than the other person who was up for the job. And it went from there, really. We started with one team and then a couple of teams. And it was at this point, actually, when I went to this is a long version. I'll cut it down a little bit. Basically, I went to Scrum Alliance coaching retreat, and I met a person there called a guy there called Sean Smith, who is we had a mutual friend and a guy called Ian McKenna. And I said to Sean, look, Sean was giving me a lift home because we live close to each other. I was like, I'm at the end. I feel like I've read every blog there is. This is going back like 7 or 8 years. I just kind of feel like what else is there left for me to learn in this world, this agile world? He said, like, get yourself this book. And it was Practices for Scaling Agile and Lean Development by Craig Larman and Bos Vodder. And I bought it, and I started reading it, and I was like, this is really interesting. Because all the problems they were talking about, I was experiencing a lot of them. And then in that book, it says, try this. So I'd be basically reading the book on a train on the way in, get to the office, go to the team or teams and be like, okay, right, how about this for an idea? And then run the experiment. And so we ended up kind of running the experiments, things were getting better. And then we gradually had more and more teams join. And it was at a point then where I ended up being very much aligned to Large Scale Scrum, to LeSS. But not intentionally. We didn't say let's adopt LeSS or we just kind of took what we thought was good advice and ran lots of experiments. So then when LeSS was formalized as a framework, it looked really interesting, and I then started badgering Craig and Buzz to try and let me try and become a LeSS trainer.
So, like, did your case study was in a bank? Was it in?
My case study was at Royal Bank of Scotland.
Yeah,
okay. And that was the case study that my trainer certification was based off of.
Yeah, and were you involved in a number of other implementations in other banks then after that?
Yeah,
implementations.
Yeah, I mean, I was rescued from a delivery which was going nowhere by a very kind gentleman named Chris. And then when I joined his organisation, he essentially pimped me out to the rest of the Royal Bank of Scotland as an agile consultant in many respects. So I got the opportunity to go and see loads of different people, like all over Europe, and it was wonderful. I had some great time, doing some work with like Ulster Bank, or doing some great work on the outskirts of London, or getting to go to Edinburgh quite a lot. And it was just great. I got to see meet loads of people and learn a lot about agile and see different problems that people were facing, and common anti-patterns that people were trying to apply. And at that point, really, there wasn't a huge amount of LeSS work that I was doing. I was just going around just being an agile coach effectively and helping people out regardless of what framework. So at that point, I spent a lot of time teaching people around like collaborative analysis techniques. We were lucky enough to have 2 days, I think it was 2 days, with Koikos, who taught us specification by example. And so I made my Inspect by Example course. I got familiar with impact mapping and started teaching about impact mapping, and I just spent a lot of time training in all the small little techniques and stuff which can help to make a difference.
I'd never been at any of Koikos classes. I'd say that was pretty amazing, was it?
Oh, it was fantastic.
Yeah.
Honoured, but it was great to have him there, and obviously we paid him. And there was a guy called Chris O, I'll call him. He got us the money to pay for Koikos to come in, and it was great. And now when he's a great guy, and I love his work, and I think specification by example is excellent. So yeah, I always trying to help people. But again, that's another way. But then all of a sudden, these things that I really enjoyed and the things I found were effective all aligned back into LeSS. And so I just kind of LeSS ended up just feeling like a bit of a home for me. And whilst I may not have been kind of promoting LeSS or working on LeSS adoptions, all the little bits that make up to a successful kind of agile environment, which are part of the overall LeSS guidance, I was involved in many, many different aspects of that at all different levels of organisation.
Thank you, Ben. So the title of our chat today is like less measures, more outcomes, right? So remember, like the Agile Manifesto, we value items on one side over this items the other side. So are you like against measurement, or like what's where are you going with that?
No, I am all for measurement. I love it a bit too much, but I think a lot of people do if they're honest with themselves. I think a lot of us kind of like the comfort, like the perception of comfort, and the confidence that a number can give us. But I do think that we need to measure probably less stuff and have a more variability in what we measure more often. I don't think that, in my experience, measures are very good. I think measures have all got a shelf life, and I think sometimes we don't realise what that shelf life is. So I think we do need, I say less measures. I mean, less than it was kind of a bad joke, right? Because less doesn't really talk about measurement particularly. Less takes a lot from lean, so you can fully expect people to be measuring cycle times, and you would hope measuring average cycle times to avoid any kind of team comparison, because that's a bit futile. But I think there is a better people about measuring less, but measuring more frequently and measuring differently. And when I said more outcomes, and as the second part of that, I've had a really uncomfortable relationship with outcomes.
Yeah.
Because I don't think, and I could be wrong on this, but maybe for many people, outcomes don't really work. And people struggle with the whole idea of outcome. And it's almost like this running joke. You know, I think you see people put on LinkedIn, or it comes up in conversation. Oh yeah, I'm working with a new client, and I asked them what their outcomes were, and they didn't know. I just think part of me is over the whole outcome idea, and where my mind has been going. I'm a huge fan of systems thinking. Huge fan of systems thinking. I wouldn't say I'm an expert. I say I'm an enthusiastic amateur. But the one thing that I do find has been very useful when I've used it, right, and it's hooked in really well, is actually let's not talk about outcomes. Let's talk about effects. Let's talk about hypotheses. Like what hypotheses do you want to test? Why do you want to test that? Now you could argue then that's kind of setting a goal or an outcome, but it's wrapped up a little bit differently. And then say, what effects do you need to see to make that happen? And that's what I'm more inclined to like at the moment. It's actually, let's look at effects. Let's understand potential systemic effects, and let's run experiments to test our hypotheses around how we think the system will behave. And that sounds really long-winded and a bit scary, but actually, it's really quite simple, and it doesn't take any more than a couple of hours for people to kind of get in the flow of it and really get a lot of benefit from this. Yeah, that's over my experimentation over the last probably 4 months or so.
Yeah, thank you. So, just get on to measures, right? So, John said on a couple of times last year, and one of the things he keeps kind of talking about is, measures can become a proxy for the vision, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of making an assumption that you should have a vision.
Yeah.
So, like, where are you with all of that stuff?
I find vision's a really funny word, right? And I don't think that visions suit every organization and every person. I think some people some people are visionaries, and they have a vision that people can get behind. Taiichi Ohno, Steve Jobs, people like I don't know, I know John F. Kennedy about going to the moon, whatever it is. These are inspirational leaders who people will choose to follow, regardless of their flaws. People will choose to follow them, and they've got a vision, and they can articulate their vision. And to a certain extent, you can't extract the vision from them. There is a symbiotic relationship. So I think visionaries naturally have visions, and they share that, and it's compelling, and people follow. But I think when you try and I've done this and failed many times, and I'm guessing a lot of that's to do with my skills in doing this, but you try and introduce a vision to someone who isn't naturally a visionary or doesn't have those leadership qualities, and they don't really care about a vision. Like, it doesn't really mean anything to them. And then you go to all the effort of creating one, and no one pays attention to it. And if it's in that instance, then absolutely the measures become a proxy for the vision, because no one really cares about the vision. No one's people rarely refer back to it. It's cheesy. I think some people believe, and there's an element of truth in it, but it's a bit cheesy and it's a bit contrived.
I can relate to what you're saying, that sometimes we kind of almost reverse engineer the vision. It can be very helpful sometimes if you really have a inspirational leader, as you say. But so, like, in the absence, let's say you didn't have a vision, right? Let's say, like in terms of your measurement, like, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up somewhere else. Isn't that Yogi Berra said that or something? But
yeah.
So, like, how do you manage then? So, like, when you're trying to come up with a set of measures for a company and all that kind of stuff, you've got a particular context. Where would you start?
So I say that whilst there may not be an explicit vision which everyone can recite and live by, I think maybe there are implicit visions. There are implicit things which bind us all together, and we roughly know where we're going a lot of the time, perhaps maybe they're sometimes a little bit short-sighted, but that's the case, and at least we know where we're going. I do completely agree, and I think this is something I've been reflecting on a lot recently. Is that I think some of the impetus comes out of Scrum, let's say, and the retrospectives when there is no goal. If you have no goal, and then people will turn and say, well, the retrospective's a waste of time. And it's like, well, then maybe it is, because why are you improving, right? Because you don't know where you're going. So I think there has to be some goal. There has to be something that aligns people. Maybe it isn't as broad and lofty as a vision, but there should be. You should know kind of, maybe not what's coming tomorrow, but where you want to be in a few months.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
So if I think of one of the clients I've worked with, Kaveya, and we did a talk on this last week, I think. And we ran an experiment. It was across a handful of teams. They knew, broadly speaking, what their goal was, but it was given to them by their CTIO, and they took that goal and said, okay, right, so we need to, we want to find a way to make sure we can ultimately get stuff into production every 2 weeks. Great, that's something we can aim for. We understand the benefit in that, and they spent about hours and hours then really creating hypotheses around that, really understanding what it would mean. How feasible did they think it was? And I wouldn't say that's it. Like, when I kind of get a bit ranty about visions, I'm thinking of coming together and making a one-page document and having it plastered on the walls and having everyone aligned to it. But I think there needs to be a goal, and it's how that manifests for people.
It's almost like a direction of travel, really. We're kind of going that way. And okay, so what models would you kind of think of then, or do you use any models? So you're in a place and you think you're going. You can give me an example if you like. You don't have to name the client, obviously, for privacy, confidentiality reasons. But it's kind of generic example. So you're in a place and you're trying to figure out whether we're getting better or we're getting worse.
Yeah.
Where would you start?
So,
or what would you avoid? I suppose, if you know the way.
Oh no, I mean there is an element, I think, of just listening to people, understanding people's problems first of all. I think because there is you have to earn people's trust and respect. I think for you to have longevity and continued engagement, you have to do something to earn trust and respect. And one thing I found has never enabled me to build trust and respect is going in there and telling people what's wrong. I don't think that going in there and calling some kind of workshop to a why agile type workshop to try and get people aligned. I don't think that always builds a lot of trust or respect initially, because people just feel like you're trying to catch them out. So I think first and foremost is that it's listen, it's talk to people, it's getting an idea of the problems.
Got a question from Matthew here. Matthew's a regular on the show. Thank you, Matthew, for your question. Hi, John. Hi, Ben. How would you measure improvements in culture?
Well, hi, Matthew, and thank you for your question. There is a model or two out there for how you measure improvements in the culture, and I think that for me, I've got an exercise that I run through to help people try to understand the relationship between culture and structure in their organization. And then the question is, when you talk about culture, what you're really talking about, I suppose, is what level of and type of engagement do you expect your people to be having? So, for example, one question, I'm a big fan of, and people feel free to query me on this, push me on it, but there is the Gallup Q12.
Yeah.
Which is, there's some questions that they've kind of distilled down. There's I think 12 questions which give an idea as to employee engagement. And I think that looking at those and drawing inspiration from those and running subjective surveys, matching that with people's observations, I think are really interesting ways to improve culture. So, for example, how often, ask the question of people, how often do you do what you've been told when you feel there's a better way? Right? If you're looking to have an agile culture, you want people to not be doing what they're told all the time. You want a certain amount of dissent.
Yeah.
So I think that asking questions like that through some kind of frequent employee survey, I think is a nice way to measure changes in culture, and then you can assess those changes as to whether or not there are improvements towards a particular goal that you're looking for. There's some great, I mean, this isn't maybe so much of a cultural one, but asking people on development teams, how fearful are you of making a change to the code base, and understanding people's fear levels. Gauging people's feelings on how they feel what is their manager appraising them on. And just getting a feel for those things, it gives you some numbers, and you can see if the engagement's shifting, which is in many respects kind of an echo of the culture that you've got. And then it's the case of understanding and measuring those individual scores and backing up with some conversation behind it. I mean, back in the old days when we were all in the same office, improvements in culture could often be measured by the level of background noise that you had, or the amount of time you saw people walking around and talking to other teams, or like how active somebody's kind of big visual board is. But isn't so much of a thing anymore. And I think that if we want to, look at, some of the things that happen culturally in organisations at the moment, you look at the fact that people's personal relationships are degrading, and that there's much more kind of many more complaints and backstabbing or talking behind people's backs, and I think that's a degradation in organisational culture, which is it's hard to measure when we're in these kind of remote situations. There is I need to remember the name of it now, but the competing values framework, I think.
Oh yeah.
Which is a way for measuring organisational culture, and I know that some people are quite a fan of it. So I've tried to use that a few times, but I've never found that it's landed very well.
Yeah. I've had some interesting experiences with this as well, and kind of the same experience as you, Ben. Like, I put together some surveys, kind of how does it feel around here, basically,
Yeah.
And but also capturing the usual stuff, the usual suspects, cycle time, our customers satisfied, impediments. I love the one you gave me a nudge one day about impediments, and I thought about the number of impediment boomerangs, the impediments that are fixed but they come back and smack you in the face. They weren't fixed.
Yeah.
But Baz was saying that inspiration would be a good thing to measure, but I've been trying to figure out for a couple of years how to measure it. And the only thing that I've come across so far that might be able to help would be SenseMaker from Cognitive Edge, because they've got this thing where they got these triads. Because apparently, if you give people a Likert scale, they kind of know what answer they're expected to say.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And even if you give them 4s, apparently they'll also figure it out. But if you give them a triangle and they have to kind of drop a dot in between, competing values, if you like, and you get different sets of them, people struggle with that. So they end up kind of being more honest about where we are. And you could kind of pick up the mood. But I haven't tried it yet, Matthew, though. So it's going to be an experiment. I saw it on climate change. It looked very good.
Yeah.
But I haven't tried it in a company yet. But Dave Snowden's tried it. Yeah.
I think there's so many different ways, and I think that if I think of this, now I've shut up and listened to you, John, and hear what you were saying. I think sometimes the best way to measure improvements in culture is to get off your arse basically and go and see. And this is the one thing that Les is very keen on. It says it isn't about reports, it's about proxies, and it isn't about measures acting as proxies for reality. It isn't about having organizational structures which are 5, 6, 7, 8 people deep. Right? It is about employing GoC. And if you are responsible for understanding improvements in culture, then go and talk to your people. And I think that's and I think you learn a lot that way. And sure, you can. I could take you through creating a systems model to map out how your culture is working. You can try and understand what the effect of putting certain levers are. And then once you've understood those, then the pinpoint areas where you need to measure to validate your hypotheses. But that all depends on what you're trying to get the improvement in. None of that is any good on its own. Yeah. You have to find ways to talk to people.
So Matthew's got a comment there. I think you're talking about John said, and is it? Or are you talking about Dave Snowden?
Well, it's funny. Dave Snowden dislikes systems thinking, doesn't he? Well, he did. I spoke to him.
Yeah, not the way you teach it though, because if it's taught in a kind of a linear way that A causes B causes C causes D, and therefore predict the outcome. But the way you talk about it's more like a social engagement to get a common understanding of what's going on. We might have a look at that actually later on. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing with any kind of modeling. It's never going to be the truth, and you shouldn't aim to get it the truth. Like, none of these models are the truth. It's just a case of how useful are they.
Yeah.
And I think you look at the relationship between something like look at to the uneducated person the apparent similarities between Ralph Stacey's complexity model and Cynefin. And then you look at actually then Ralph Stacey stepping away from its complexity model, saying, well, everything's complex because we're humans. That's just how we do it. There's loads of interesting questions around there, but these aren't just models. And the question is, how can you model something so that it's useful?
Yeah, just going back to you talking about getting off our backsides and going meeting with people. I can relate to that because I might show it up later on, but basically, a lot of the time I would start off with a logic model, saying, just trying to brainstorm, what are the key measures you could have, right? And so the inputs, the activities, the outputs, the outcomes, the impact, and I'll flash it up on the screen later on if people are interested. And so that would be like a way, okay, so you end up with like 40, 50 measures on the board. And then some genius usually says, yeah, but we need to keep things simple, and they forget about as simple as possible, but no simpler. So it's that's a bit weird. So they end up kind of picking just a few measures, and then people know how to game the system. They just, I just need to reduce cycle time, or need to deliver more features or whatever. But they write PBIs for going to the toilet. Then you know what I mean. So, so there's a devil in every measure, isn't there? But the point is, like, when I went out then to meet people, so I captured all these things, whatever they'd decided. Like, it's almost like peace talks trying to figure out which measures you want to select, right, amongst 10 people, 12 people in the organization. Yeah. And you go off and measure them, but you're right. The value is when I sit down, the survey is almost an excuse to talk to them to find out what's really going on.
Yeah, no, it should be, and it should be like I've run. Yeah, I remember running a few engagement surveys. I was like, great, what do we do with this? And I'm like, and this is to my peers at the time. And I'm like, well, you get off your bottoms and you go and talk to people, right? There's apparently a problem here, and you talk to people. And there was one person who was just phenomenal at it, head of engineering, and he would happen to be, if he happened to be in a location when the survey results were announced, he would get everyone together and say, right, okay, your results are saying this. Talk to me about it. Right, I'm concerned about this. I don't think it's right. Talk to me. But he was the anomaly. No, none of the other senior managers in that organization really seemed to want to kind of go and talk to people deeply about some of the things that came about. So we're never going to see any meaningful change in that respect, apart from this one person who did what I feel was the right job. But it's interesting when you've got those 50 measures and they're all there, and I think it's a great opportunity to do some systems modeling. Right?
Yeah,
because if you think of systems modeling is, as I see it, it's just a way of creating a shared language and helping to increase the collective understanding of something. It doesn't. I'm not saying you're there to get a. I'm not saying it's to. Sorry, I saw Matthew's comment there and it distracted me somewhat. That it isn't to find out the truth. It isn't to say this is absolutely what's going to happen, but it does do wonders for helping people understand. Well, we've got 50. Like, which ones are the right ones? How do they affect each other? How do we think they're going to affect each other? And let's create an idea of how we think they might affect it, and let's go and figure out if that's true. And that's the approach I like.
So Matthew has a question. So hi, gents, a bit off topic. Does LeSS discourage Kanban? If no, any examples? Ben, I'll leave you take it first.
Kanban it depends what you're talking about, right? I mean, Kanban comes from Lean originally.
Yeah.
All right. So if you look at it in that respect, Lean thinking is a LeSS principle. So LeSS, it absolutely does not discourage Lean, and it wants it to be applied sensibly across the product development group. And so this is one thing that always probably because I read the book on Kanban, read the book on Kanban, but never been on any formal training. And that's Kanban for software development, which I think is different, perhaps in some respects. But I don't think it discourages Kanban. I think that it quite likes the things that kind of lean thinking bring to the party. So I think that there is even an example, I believe, of one less adoption where people weren't using Scrum, ironically, and they were able to use Kanban within less in that respect. So I don't think it discourages it, but I don't think it explicitly encourages it either. It talks some things from much more of a lean perspective.
Yeah, queuing theory as well as mentioned, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. I'm actually using Kanban within a less pattern, if you like, at the moment. So we're using the same kind of rhythm, the refinement, during a 1 month time box or whatever. We're using 1 month's rhythms, and a lot of the concepts from less about no team product owners, just one leader. We actually didn't even call that leader a product owner because everyone wanted to be a product owner. And yeah, so a lot of things really coming from less, and from 40,000 feet, you think they were using Scrum. They're just using maybe some of the Kanban analytics as well. And of course, as well, we know now as well, Matthew, that Scrum and Kanban is supported since 2018 by Scrum.org. So you can do Scrum and you can do Kanban on top, but you can also do it with just Kanban on its own, I think.
So educate me then, John. Educate me.
Yeah.
What unique measurements does Kanban, from a software development perspective, bring, which weren't originally included in queuing theory or lean thinking?
They're all there. So
this is the thing that I find. This is what I find like amusing, right? Is that we talk about Kanban as this weird alien thing, but it was all there to begin with, right? All they've done, all was done. It's great. I'm not dissing Kanban, but it's just taken what was already there and wrapped up in a way for us software people.
Yeah.
So if you're kind of employing queuing theory and empirical process control, and you're looking at lean, you're going to be doing a lot of what Kanban believes.
Yeah.
So in Kanban, it doesn't prescribe you to have any form of bound time box in which you're going to work in, nor does it give you prescription to ensure that you're following empirical process control. And I just see Scrum is kind of very similar. Scrum gives you a box to work within, which is useful for some people, but it also gives you prescribed things to try and ensure that you're going to be following empirical process control, which is really, really useful for some organizations and not useful for others. So I kind of think it's a really great conversation to get into around that LeSS and Kanban and the rest of it. But I just kind of feel it's kind of a, dare I say it, right, kind of a moot point. Because you get if you're, but it's the same way that does LeSS discourage extreme programming? Like LeSS doesn't really mention extreme programming, but it mentions lots of stuff that go on in extreme programming. No, LeSS doesn't discourage extreme programming, although it doesn't laud it up on the front page of the website saying use XP, but it does say use the majority of the techniques that came from XP. And we know that Scrum and XP work really well. So,
I hope that helps you, Matthew. So there's no real blocker there, we don't think, and maybe 1 or 2 examples coming soon where people can demonstrate what they've actually done with it. Thank you. So just getting back to the measurement, right? So one thing I just wanted to kind of talk about was, I mentioned earlier, where do you even start, right? So just for the audience, just to kind of, I just want you to mention a couple of models, Ben, the logic model and evidence-based management, just kind of touch on that for a moment, if you like. And then let's kind of continue the conversation in terms of, how we kind of, what can you measure, if anything, right? So I have this thing called, it's basically, this isn't just an idea boards thing. And essentially, you've got different measures on the board, right? So one of the things I really like about idea boards is free. And you can kind of look at the different sections, so on. And so here, for example, I've got some inputs resources. So I've got budget, maybe technology, timelines, customer needs, cost per sprint, stuff like that. Maybe there's some vision or product goal or intermediate goal, something like that, unmet needs. They'd be like a typical inputs in a logic model from the Kellogg Foundation. And then you might have some activities. I'm not saying that these are the best activities, but a number of disciplined events, for example, I find if the level of readiness for agility of a team is very low, that capturing that might be good because because you could be measuring the number of items the team is delivering, but they might be delivering nothing. They might have a plumbing problem. So you might get some hope if they're actually doing something around being disciplined in their work. How much work in progress is there, for example? Are they doing refinement really well, stuff like that? Or, what kind of research are they doing? But a lot of people would say activities are bad, but some of these activities mightn't be bad measures, And then you got outputs, for example. So like number of releases, number of increments, number of features, bug fixes, experiments, learning some experiments, maybe impediment boomerang should be in there as well, maybe. Uh, Features that tap into customer jobs to be done. So outputs would be things that you deliver, but we haven't had any confirmation or feedback yet that we've generated some value for a customer, end user, or even society. And a lot of people say it's outcomes over outputs. And when you hear, according to Josh Seiden, he'd say an outcome is a change in customer behavior. Like, we've got more sales, more acquisitions, more activations, more revenue because they really love what we're doing. There's more retention. There's more, or maybe there's we've improved technical debt, or we've improved our time to market, something like that, or we've got a more stable platform. So there'd be kind of examples of outcomes, and then you'd have impact, which is very difficult to tie to what you're doing in your team. So like, revenue, the company, employee satisfaction, customer satisfaction, market share, unmet needs, stuff like that. So this is known as the logic model. And I often find it useful just to kind of do a quick brainstorm of like, what do we think we want to measure in this place, And you can argue you shouldn't really be voting on the inputs. You should just vote on the activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact. And so with whoever I'm working with, I'd get them to kind of pick out, and so in this case, they picked out number of disciplined events as a top thing to measure. What kind of testing they're doing. Measurements were a bit dubious because they were maybe focusing just on releases and increments, not so much. Actually, they do have bug fixes. And then in terms of outcomes, they were kind of saying results from research like prototyping and customer feedback were the top things they wanted to catch. And then, of course, revenue. But revenue, you can't really tie that to your product a lot of the time if you're working in a product-based organization. So I find this useful, but one of the things I found with it, Ben, is I was missing a few lenses, And so what I do is I usually start off and say, okay, this is our base, right? And so we're just still missing some tricks. So what I usually do then is I say, there's another model from Scrum.org called evidence-based management, right? So what they can do is you can use these 4 key values. And so current value is about like, using the metaphor of a cow, like, how well are we milking the cow, Nokia, making loads of money on their phones back that time, how much money are we making per employee and so on. Are we satisfying our customers with our current products and so on? And then there's time to market, like, how frequently are you releasing, end-to-end customer cycle time, stuff like that. Ability to innovate, I used to find confusing. So now I call it inability to innovate. It's like what's slowing us down. If it's software, in terms of do we have all that infrastructure in place to enable continuous delivery? If we're in marketing, for example, do we have some processes that are slowing down our ability to deliver new offerings to the market? And then unrealized value, Ben, is where I find a lot of people kind of miss a trick, They this is where you have unmet needs. Like for example, Uber is an example of an unmet need, isn't it? Where, you can now book if you're in London, for example, you can book a taxi within 3 minutes. You don't have to book your cab the night before. And you don't have to worry, like if you lose your phone, you know who the driver is, you can contact. It still costs you 50 quid to get your phone back probably, but at least you can contact the driver, you know what I mean? And if you have a daughter, you're feeling a bit more comfortable that she's going to be okay, your teenage daughter going to be okay going into town and so on. So what I like to do, Ben, is if I use an idea boards for the logic model, I say, okay, using this lens, what are we missing? Do we miss anything? You know what I mean? And of course, people usually miss the unrealized value, and they usually miss the ability to innovate as well. The stuff that's slowing us down, like technical debt and so on. The other thing I love about evidence-based management is I had this chat with Mark Noneman. He's fairly well up in evidence-based management. And I just caught him here in a screenshot where he was talking about an addition they made to the model in 2020, Where now what they have is they have this model where you are here, you're trying to go in a particular direction, you're trying to evolve from where you are, and then you might have some kind of long off, far off kind of thing where you're going, kind of direction you're going in, but you've some kind of intermediate goal, which I think was what you were talking about earlier, something we're going to try and achieve in the next few months and so on. And so there's a real kind of experimentation focus on the new evidence-based management model. So then what you could do is you could say, okay, come back to my idea boards, what tricks are we missing? So like, we didn't vote on the experiments. Like, I thought we wanted to learn as a company, but we don't seem to think that's important. So it still gives us too many measures, but Ben, it kind of, I find it helps me to kind of spot what might be missing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the problem then, of course, there's too many of them. So like, how do you pick them? So usually kind of go with some kind of voting system. But what has your experience been? Like, have you used similar kind of models, or do you do kind of is it system modeling that you use instead, or what would you how would you get to that place?
So is it? I mean, when it comes to, like, I've looked at EBM and I like a lot of what's there. And I remember I've done all kinds of things around measurement, right? And then they've all generally been a bit average. I've always found anything I've found has made a massive impact. It's been through using systems modeling, and also not getting absolutely dogmatic about things, right? I think there is and I'll show you in a sec. You can build a model, and we'll kind of talk about how it can be used. But the one thing I have done is that, sometimes you walk into you get to an organisation, or you get to a group of teams or a team, and they've got a clear goal and they know it. Great. Sometimes they haven't, but they just got a gut feel that they want to do something, and it's the right thing to do to head in that direction. And often I just kind of start meeting where they are. If I feel that a bit of education might help, then fine. But I'd always try and meet them where they are, and just kind of, even if the goal isn't exactly the most perfect, well articulated, and what you're saying about an outcome is changing it's a behaviour in a customer. That basically, I want to better say, okay, well, if we're talking about delivering a product, we deliver a product to change people's behaviours, and if people see that behaviour change is good for them, then they pay money for it.
Yeah.
Right, and that's kind of what it boils down to. So for me, it is, how are we going to make, save, or protect the organisation's money, and what type of effects are we looking for in the customer's behaviours? Now, the one thing I will say is that if you look at product ownership, like less or not, real product ownership should effectively be an elaborate form of gambling.
Yeah.
Right, you are making a gamble every single time you're going to put a feature out there, and you have to kind of you have to get some data to understand whether or not you think it's going to be a worthwhile gamble at times. And so I think product ownership is like gambling. So looking at that question that's popped up, how does LeSS treat product discovery work? It doesn't have a specific measurable release value. I think that there has to be some value in doing the work, and maybe it's to give you some data so that you can make a more educated gamble on what features you do release. LeSS is all about experimentation. It's all about experimentation, and what LeSS is all about as well. LeSS is also about saying to understand the cost of what you're delivering. Part of a LeSS framework says your backlog should be estimated, and people often feel a bit, that seems a bit weird. But when I asked Boz about it, he said, look, how can you know the value of something if you don't know how much it's going to cost? So even if things are sized, right, if you're not using estimates, you have to know roughly how much something is going to cost before you can talk about the value of it. So to pick up Andre's question there, it may not have specific measurable release value, but you understand the cost. And if you're willing to take on that cost as a gamble to learn something new and to experiment with something in the market, then LeSS will be all over that. That's at the very essence of the idea of kind of keeping a focus on the product, keeping a focus on the customer, finding ways to continuously improve towards perfection. So
we're getting loads of questions now. Some of them are duplicates, I've just noticed, so I'll just skip. There's one from Richard Ross. He's a member of my agility chefs community, so it's a bit cut off, so I'll try to read the bit that's cut off. So talking about culture, just a joke or not to share, I work in such a toxic and cold environment. The building is divided into small offices per 4 people, silo mentality, that when I try to introduce the 360 feedback system, I'll just cut it off so I can read it now. My assumption was, hey, we all need feedback, so let's get it from the most competent people the ones around me in my team. I was told by people saying, Ricky, I lived through communism. We don't want any scoring of people around here. Full story goes beyond the scope of this comment, but it was staggering to witness thinking process of these folks and what structure can do to a culture. Crazy, huh?
I did, like it is, but this is, I mean, like, yeah, it is crazy and it's sad.
Yeah.
This is what I mean, like, like I kind of want to do a bit of systems modeling with you, John, because I feel that,
cool.
Like, because even when, and then like, I'm gonna see, it's been a long week, right? We're stuck in lockdown, most of us, right? In some way, shape, or form. So, if I don't want to sound in any way grumpy, but when you get all those measures up and you ask people to vote, like what I found is that like democracy sucks.
Yeah.
Because democracy is fantastic when people are well informed, well educated.
Yeah, totally.
Right?
Yeah.
That's when it works at its best. But unfortunately, we're not, right?
Yeah.
And when we get, and I've done this with dot voting, and you kind of said, there was I got a little funny anecdote, but we get people together and we say vote, and we say, and then we'll listen to the will of the people. But that's a bit rubbish, right? Because oftentimes we don't end up with what we want. So I think that we absolutely, like get people up there and get people to look at things. But how do we get people into a more informed state so that their vote means something more? Because all we're doing is basically you get 10 people in a room and get them to vote on something. You've got 10 different mental models, 10 different sets of biases, all working independently to vote on things which they're all interpreting differently.
Yeah.
And then you end up with this big smorgasbord of stuff. What do I do with it?
If you want to share your screen there, Ben.
Yeah. I was on an agile training course, and the trainer was all about, we're going to democratize it. We're going to understand your learning outcomes. Put up here what you want to learn. He just ignored it all and just reinterpreted it all to cover what he was going to cover anyway. And it was the most insincere, contrived kind of situation I've been in a training environment. But he knew democracy didn't work, but he wanted us to make it feel like we were part of the process, which I thought was
Yeah.
Anyway.
I can totally relate to that, Ben. Yeah.
And then I did it then for like 2 years after that. So I can't really chastise him too much. So John, this is a little framework that I've been working on now. I've got a call tomorrow morning at 8:30 in the morning to go through this with the person that person is part of the group where we developed this on the fly, right? And we've used this particular group are using it a lot now, and they're finding it really beneficial. So what we often say is, okay, like we say, you can go and say, what's the goal? And do you know what? A lot of the time, people don't know.
Yeah.
Right? They just don't know. So I start and I say, okay, right. So tell me something you want to measure. Go on, John. Tell me something you think might be interesting to measure.
I think the customer feedback, changing customer behavior, like for example, maybe there's more traction on some customer journey. More customer success, let's put it that way. Okay,
so for customer success.
Yeah, they've managed to achieve some thing that they needed to do, and they've used our product to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. So customer success feedback. So that way. So right. So we're saying great. So what we're saying, John, we say we want to see an increase in this. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. So what do you think would need to? Let's say, what do you think needs to decrease? Okay. What needs to decrease to increase this? What do you think?
Oh, what would need to decrease? I think the distance from the customer. So, like, if you're in a team and like there's fucking 25 levels between you and the customer, I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean. That could be a problem.
Okay, and what when you say distance, what are we talking about here? We're talking about
organizational distance. So, like, if I want to talk to a customer, there's I don't know, there's a number of layers. I don't have permission to talk to the customer. There's a number of layers between me and the customer. So I'm just getting translations of, what the customer actually wants. It's like, by the time it gets to me, it's like, do this kind of thing.
Okay. So you're saying there are translations, right? There's some level of...
Yeah, it's kind of like, the Chinese whisper job, that cartoon with the swing hanging off the side of the tree instead of hanging straight down, right?
Okay. So
Um,
as a result of this, right, so we're going through, we've got loads of layers between the organizational layers, let's
yeah,
say.
yeah, yeah,
Let's change this to org layers. A number of org layers between team and users. And we
yeah.
got, but then as those layers increase, then what we're saying is that increases the amount of translation of customer needs.
Yes.
Okay. And so then as the translation of customer needs increases,
Dissonance will go up. Yeah, the dissonance as in like what the customer actually asked for, like versus like what's written down is going to be like
between, let's say, the difference between what customer needs and what we have written down.
yeah, yeah,
Okay, great. So then we say translation of customer needs, as that keeps increasing, the difference between what the customer needs and what they want and what we've got written down, that goes up. And then as this difference increases, then what we're going to say, that's going to decrease the customer feedback in some way.
yes. Or what it could do is it could cause what John Seddon calls failure demand. We do something wrong for the customer.
Yeah, okay. So let's say,
yeah.
Is failure demand, does failure demand cause a decrease in customer success, or is failure demand just separate?
I think failure demand is maybe how you display to your granny that the customer success has gone down. So I'm nearly thinking that, that the difference between the customer needs would go to the failure demand and the failure. Yeah.
So you think?
I'm thinking that would go up, so it wouldn't be opposite. Yeah. If you're not used to doing system modeling attendees, it's when there's an O on the line, it means the opposite, and when there's an arrow, it means if the source goes up, the destination also goes up. If there's an O, source goes up, the destination goes down.
And this interesting point, John, right? Because now what we've done here is a quick bit of systems modeling, right? Now, I can talk to someone who's got no understanding of systems thing or systems modeling, and now I've got enough here that they've just done systems modeling.
Yeah.
Like it was all in their heads. It was all in your head, right? This little bit of a system here. I'm not saying it's the truth, but I'm saying it could be useful. So now, if I'm going to teach systems modeling, I just say, look, what we said here, we said if this goes up, this goes up. And all we're saying, this arrow just continues that on.
Yeah.
And the same way, if this goes down, then this will go down. And then when we put an O on it, all we're saying is it just flips a direction. So this is going to go up and this is going to go down. Right. So congratulations, you just built your first systems model. That's great.
Yeah.
Let's think of something else, right? So we've got our.
So I have another one actually, which is related topic, and I hope you don't mind while you have the bonnet lifted, maybe bundling it in, or whether it's a different model.
Go for it.
But one of the things that I'm observing, I've just noticed it in a few places, that. So at the moment I'm doing Kanban, right? So people understand flow, and I'm doing it in a less way, but I'm basically doing Kanban, and people actually do get it. They're like, you do less things, and you're more focused, and you get more stuff done, and they get it. They actually get it. And I use the metaphor of the tortoise racing against the hare. The tortoise wins. Stay on the backlog. Leave something on the backlog. It's okay, and then eventually it'll come in, but it seems like it's slower, but it's actually going to get there faster. So that's fine. Everybody gets that when you kind of bring them through an hour of a Kanban simulation or whatever. But what's going on in lots of companies is people themselves, I know leaders, there's a leadership story here as well, but just focusing on the people part for now, I believe that people can be complicit in keeping themselves busy because of the way they're measured. Right? So at the moment, I've got two career paths, right? I can get promoted as a manager, and I might be a crap manager, right? But that's the only way I can get promoted. Or maybe I can become more of a specialist. I'm not sure whether companies reward. Some companies have technical tracks where people don't have to go through the management route to get pay increases and promotions and so on. But then there's a possible third track that I'm thinking of, Ben.
Mm-hmm.
And this is Craig's idea, that basically Craig Larman, that what you might do is, to encourage people to be willing to learn, because if you want to be close to the customer, you want to build something that the customer wants, you want to be able to adapt to the customer, then we need more flexible teams. Thank you for writing. He's writing all the variables. See that, guys? He's writing variables as I'm telling the story. Fantastic. And so when you need if you need flexible teams to adapt to what the customer needs, then that means you need people and teams who are learning, so they become more flexible, so they don't get stuck in silos, and then you will increase your distance, right, to those other from the customer, basically. So in order to kind of reverse that, if we could have some kind of scheme in a company where you get promoted based on the number of materially different skills you have. So in software, for example, we would consider C# and Java to be the same because they're not materially different. You'd have people pretending that they have an extra skill and they don't, they're just gaming. Remember, there's devil in every measure, right? But if you could say, number of materially different skills that I have, plus the number of skills I can coach other people on. So you get promoted over a 40-year career path on, how many skills do I have and how many can I coach other people on. So the idea is that I'm learning throughout my career, and I don't have to go through the management route to get promoted. And I'm kind of wondering if that would work. And I'm kind of, that seems to be, thank you for writing the variables down as I go along. So Ben has been doing this for years, so he knows how to write variables and
I like the practice.
Yeah.
And part of I feel part of the art of being able to extract variables from a conversation is to do it without adding anything wherever possible, but that's really hard sometimes.
Yeah.
So what's happening is that this is why you never rely upon systems models to be the truth, because everything I try to write down is tainted by my own mental models. I have wrestled for every single one of those to not add my own stuff.
Yeah.
But then I'm having to guess some of the sentiment behind it, and I think this is part of the challenge now. If we look at this together then, and we said, and what I found interesting, right, and this is, and I will relate this to measurement in a minute, right, because this is the beauty of doing this model, is that you say that people have a good understanding of flow, and as their understanding of flow increases, their belief in flow increases.
Right?
But then there's something about the benefits of flow to the individual, right, is seemingly going down, right? There's something which...
the reward system, if you have a traditional reward system, that would counteract the benefits to the individual.
Yeah, so if we say promotion schemes based upon specialism only, as that increases, then we're saying the benefits to the individual of flow are going to go down.
Yeah, so it's a no. Yeah.
We'll put an O on there.
Yeah.
So we're getting there. So now actually then, as the benefits of flow to the individual, as they decrease, the belief in flow will also decrease.
Yeah.
Because if there's no benefit to them, why are they going to believe in it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Then if we then say that actually then promotion schemes based upon specialism only, then that is going to decrease teams' ability or desire to flex to customers' need. So as that increases, that will decrease.
Yeah. Or would you put another variable in between? Would you have the team is multi-learning, to explain to your granny? Because that's a little trick, isn't it? If you can't explain to your granny, So that one you have over on the left there, team is multi-learning. So could you link the promotion schemes based on specialism as an opposite to... Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we'll say is, and that explain it to your granny. That I like that. I always like that idea. Because there's another thing which younger people, not younger than us, John, will say is Eli 5. Heard of Eli 5?
No, I haven't.
Explain it like I'm 5.
Oh, right. Okay.
which I always quite like. And what I found from systems modeling on promotion schemes goes up like it goes down. What I find with systems modeling is that if you have to explain a step that you're making in the model, then what that's inferring is that perhaps the model could be more useful because you're having to then explain part of your own mental model or combined mental model of the group to explain what's happening. So maybe it could be more useful, as you rightly said, to add something else in here. So as teams multi-learning goes down, the team's ability to affect the customer need goes down.
Yeah.
But we would say as promotion schemes based upon specialism and generalism, as they increase, team multi-learning increases, team multi-learning increases, team's ability increases. Now, what you would hope then is that as a team's ability to flex to customer needs goes up, what, failure demand goes down?
Yes, because they know what the customer wants.
Yeah. The team's ability to flex goes up, failure demand goes down. Fantastic. And we're going to park that one for a sec, but I just wanted to kind of show you here.
Yeah.
Now, this isn't true, this isn't right, but what we've actually got here is a reasonably interesting thing, a set of things to model now, and a set of things to measure, right? If you looked at this, and this is one thing about systems thinking, they say, there is no blame. There is no blame and there is no root cause. Because if you looked at this model and you appreciate that this is just a tiny snapshot of a much bigger thing that's going on, then actually we know that no one of these things is basically the root cause of any of it, right? It's all linked and they're all affected. And where do you point? And blame is a waste anyway, so why even bother? Let's not worry about blame, let's talk about root cause. I would also say in this respect, right, let's just forget about the whole outcome word, right? Let's look at this series as a useful articulation of what me and you, John, think is cause and effect.
Yeah.
So let's look at this model, and you tell me out of all of these, like, which one do you want to see an increase of?
So if I was looking for something to drive things to be better, I'd want the promotion scheme based on generalizing specialists to be improved. I think that would make everything go green, basically.
Okay, so our goal is change. We are saying increase promotion schemes on specialism and.
So what we mean attendees is generating specialists. So you're kind of your T-shaped, comb-shaped, whatever the phrase is. That you're learning more skills all the time, and you're able to coach more people. Yeah.
So if we're saying that's the goal, fantastic. Now then, if we look, let's say we want to increase that because we think that increases multi-learning, that increases teams' ability to flex customer needs, that will decrease failure demand. Excellent. But now we look at this, and if we're going to say, well, through which variables do we think we can affect that? We look at this and say, well, do you know what? At the moment, nothing's affecting this. So that's, then what we would do, and we won't do it now.
Right, sure, I got it. Yeah.
So what needs to go up to increase this? What needs to go down to increase this? What are the things we need to consider? And we list some things out. So then what we get are some things here, and we say through, and we can add variables on here.
Yeah.
And then instantly we've got things that we can measure. You can measure anything, right? You've got things that we can measure here. And that's really useful. But then we've got this thing to enable, and that's if you've got like a second order goal. So if you're saying that increased promotion of specialism and generalism to enable increased customer success.
Yeah.
All we're doing with this is that we are effectively just saying, look, here are some variables, and we're trying to articulate a little snapshot of the model. And what we create here is a hypothesis.
Yeah.
So if we took this and then said, okay, let's apply it to something which we've actually got some stuff here, and the goal is increased customer satisfaction, let's say.
Yeah.
Okay, so through. So we need to decrease failure demand. Okay, well, actually, decreasing failure demand, we believe is going to be a nice leading indicator. But we also then can see here is through reduction in translation of customer needs.
Yeah.
Because, and we'll just cut that one out because maybe that's not necessary now. So then what we've got here, we'd say, okay, right. So our hypothesis is we can increase customer satisfaction if we affect this. Yeah. And what I would say to people is, let's look at these and say, well, which ones have got the highest leverage? Which ones can you do something about now? Because you're probably not going to be able to change the number of organizational layers between team and customer. But maybe there's some experiments we can do around reducing this. And we say, okay, so granted, that's this one, that one here, the one I just clicked on, is a big effect on it. But are there other ways we can affect this? Let's talk about other ways we think we can affect this. What are some of the experiments we can run? And we build up a series of these small hypotheses, which people then go and execute. And they come back every week, every couple of weeks, and they look at the model and say, well, we tried that, and do you know what? We were right. That was actually what happened. And we tried that, And then that didn't happen. So what more do we need to learn about our system? What more do we need to model? What more do we need to have a conversation about?
Got
And
it.
when I did this with with one team at Conveyor Insurance, it was phenomenal the effect it had. Morale went up. I mean, productivity went up. Customer satisfaction went up, and it was all because they sat down and spent time to try and understand their system a bit better.
Do you know what John Seddon says the same thing? You're coming at it from a different angle, but with the same effect. Talk to people, get them to tell you what they're being measured right now, but tell them to try and come up, ask them to kind of get involved with you in terms of measuring where you're going forward. There's a lot of parallels, is what I'm hearing from what you're saying, what John Seddon's saying.
Well, I mean, I think that's wonderful. Now, I've read John's books, and I'm sure that I've stolen something from him. I've always been a big fan of systems thinking, right? And I've used it a lot. I use it in all my training courses. But what I found was that actually, and I'd always thought, we always talk about measurement, but I think we're having the wrong conversation, right? Because we talk about measurements in isolation. So when we do we reenact failed democracy, right? Because we let people all kind of vote on stuff. What they've not got is the potential systemic effects. I'm not saying actuals, but they have no thought as to how these things are going to interrelate. And we always say, you can bring two things together here really well. What do people always say about measurement, right? That there's always unintended consequences.
Yeah.
They always say that. And what do people say about systems thinking, right? There's always unintended consequences. And systems thinking is designed to try and understand a bit further ahead about unintended consequences.
Yeah, just try to figure them out in advance. Yeah.
Yeah. So surely using systems thinking and modeling just to create better measurement hypotheses isn't going to be a bad thing.
So I want to address a comment on the screen there. So it's from Matthew. So Agile HR, a new way of looking at culture and structure. Love the system modeling, by the way. Yes, we will have Carolyn Mumby on talking about Agile HR in the coming weeks, and Ben is teeing us up nicely for that conversation. So thank you, Ben, and thank you.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if anybody is ever interested, feel free to get me on LinkedIn, and I will share. So I'll just move that out of the way. I will share some systems modeling variables that I spent a few years curating around the relationship between structure and culture in an organization.
That sounds really cool. Yeah, it's really cool.
I'm happy if anybody is interested. Maybe John, I'll get you some slides over at some point.
Yeah,
and share them.
Thank you. I'll share them on the event. Absolutely. And that just reminds me. I'll just stop the screen share just for a moment. But yeah, thank you. And just in terms of Ben's company, his company's called Sheave. If you want to go to one of his training courses, you go to the Learning. Sheave is the name of the company. He's pointing to it. And upcoming courses on online LeSS practitioner. I've gone to it. I was very impressed. I loved. I found I've been to Craig's class and Baz's, and basically it's got the best of both. It's really, really nice the way Ben has done it. I really like the way he's done it. So it's really worthwhile going to. So it's 8th of March and the 17th of May. And he's also got LeSS Basics, which is a shorter course. You don't have the time to go on a full LeSS practitioner. And that's on the 7th of week commencing the 7th of April, because we're all working remotely now with our homeschooling and all that. So it's kind of stretched out over a few days. And Ben also does a lot of work in remote facilitation. He's got a masterclass on that, but it's on demand. So just give him a shout if you want to find out more about that. So sheave.co.uk. But you better knock on Ben's door fast, because he's actually really busy. So it's just a nice problem to have. Ben.
Oh, lovely problem to have. I mean, if only it wasn't for like lockdowns and balancing being a good dad, right, and doing the right thing by your kids, but at the same time trying to share some interesting ideas and thoughts around LeSS and structure and culture and measurement and systems thinking. So it's a fun balance to try and get.
It is indeed. There's one thing we forgot to talk about, and this will be the last thing. And by the way, this is a warning for people who are online who want to ask questions. Now is the time to get your last questions in. So one thing, Ben, that we didn't talk about yet, but there's a nice segue from your system modeling, because one of the things about measurement is that your measures need to change as you go along.
Yes.
because you said earlier on, we meet people where they are. Hopefully, where they are is going to be different as we go along, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe it plateaus. Um, and for example, it could be good when a team doesn't have very good readiness for agility to measure some activities in terms of discipline. But as they solve the plumbing problem, you move on to their maybe more open measurements as they get better at delivery. You're getting more focused on effects and the customer and so on. And then I guess, Ben, I'm guessing though that when you build up this sequence of experiments, they would drive different measurements,
Yeah.
which means that your measurement system is evolving, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I personally, I think that there are some measures which you're going to get kind of reasonably quick feedback from, and you'll know quickly whether or not they are useful measures or not. So I think that we can say they're useful, we'll keep them, or they're not, and we'll tweak them. And I think that some measures need to be refined a lot, and weekly, fortnightly. I don't see why you would want to keep your measures the same, because stuff's always changing.
Yeah.
But stuff is always changing, and people are always changing. And if you measure the same thing forever, then people are going to get used to measuring that thing anyway. And it's just going to become just useless, like a vanity metric. So I've always been too much on the side of being a bit more free flowing and a bit hippie-like with these things. But I think you can have an element of rigor to it. So absolutely, measurements should change because your people are changing and your goals are changing. And simply, but I'm kind of not in the mood anymore just to spin the roulette wheel of measurement and see where we land and hope it's the right one. I'd rather put some more rigorous thought into the possible systemic effects of what we're choosing to measure today, and then how we might change those measures like in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and when you meet people, you find out what's really going on, and people do figure out a way to game what's going on, and they know. Some people think, well, you need a baseline. There's elements of truth to that. Do we improve on maybe some key ones or whatever? But then if you do that as well, they become a proxy for the vision, and it's kind of a dangerous nosedive. So it's a difficult one to solve. It's really, really tricky. Just for people out there. I do have a lovely little toy that I forgot to show you. I've got a lovely little clock. Oh, it's gone off now. There we are. 3:36. Bump that up, guys. Ring my bell, right? Subscribe to me on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and catch a lot of great content from people like Ben. And we've had loads of interviews in the last year. We're ramping it up now. Carolyn Mumby is going to be next, Agile HR. So thanks very much, everyone. And thank you, Ben, for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed this. It was like chatting with a mate. It was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Well, it's a pleasure, John. And thank everyone for watching and your comments. Hopefully I get to, maybe we can do it again sometime when I've actually kind of put a bit more finesse around this approach. But thank you very much for having me, John.
Sounds lovely, Ben. And looking forward to it. Take care of yourself.
Cheers.
Over and out, everyone. Thank you. Good night. Bye-bye.